Hi, my name is Yael. I'm a PhD candidate in Public Policy and Administration at Ben-Gurion University in Israel. In my dissertation, I'm investigating the relation between nationalism and neoliberalism in the processes of state-led gentrification in the Israeli cities. Today, I would like to present a paper co-authored with my advisor, Professor Ben-Porat, focusing on the case of gentrification in the city of Akko. In this opportunity, I would like to thank Professor Ben-Porat for his mentoring and for working together in this project. Akko is a city in the north of Israel, also considered as disadvantaged city dealing with high unemployment rate and negative migration. Of the city 300,000 residents, 68% are Jews, 29% are Muslim Arab, and 3% are Christian Arabs. More specifically, we focus on gentrification in the old city of Akko. By gentrification, I mean the entrance of higher socioeconomic population into the neighborhood, changing the built environment and displacing local working class residents. So the old city is an historical neighborhood surrounded by seawater and wall, preserved Ottoman historical structure from 11th century. So the old city is populated by around 5,000 to 8,000 Arab citizens, most of them working class living in public housings. The old city considered as disadvantaged neighborhood and stigmatized as crime and poverty era. However, due to its historic value and proximity to the sea, it's also targeted as a tourist and real estate potential by the government and by a local municipality, and they encourage investors and entrepreneurs to develop the tourism in the area. Through these efforts, new hotels, restaurants, and galleries were opened and tourism increased. In 2001, the old city was declared by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Housing prices also rose. The municipality raised property taxes, and public housing company began to evict tenants, Arab citizens who were debitor, and put the houses for sale, many of them bought by Jewish investors and entrepreneurs. The entrance of Jewish residents into the Arab neighborhood was not only a result of economic-led gentrification, but also facilitated by a Zionist NGO called Hayalim. Established in 2002, Hayalim NGO declared goal was to promote the settlement of Jewish young students in the Israeli peripheral cities as a Zionist pioneering act and as a socio-economic mission. In return for housing and scholarship, the students of Hayalim volunteering and living in the local communities. So Hayalim project is supported and funded by the government, local municipality, and philanthropy. As part of the redevelopment policy of the old city of Akko, in 2007, the government and local municipality promote the entrance of 30 Hayalim students to the neighborhood by providing them 5 buildings to live in. In the photo, you can see one of Hayalim building from the roof and from the alley. So these neighborhoods changes, and specifically Hayalim entrance to the neighborhood, have led us to ask what are the role of ethno-national and economic motivation and consideration in the state-led gentrification process, and what are its implications. Studying gentrification in old city of Akko, we looked beyond the neoliberal terminology and argue that gentrification in contemporary contested city cannot be investigated without considering questions of ethnic politics and nationalism. Definition of gentrification have expanded over time. While initial studies define gentrification as a neighborhood changes driven by economic interest and individual choice, nowadays in its first research wave, gentrification described it as a political strategy in which the state is a primary agent. Studies have also examined the implication of gentrification on displacement of long-term working class residents and ethnic or minority groups. However, there is still a lack of attention to the role of nationalism as a motivation force in the process, a gap which this paper aimed to fill. In order to explain the displacement of ethnic, racial, or minority groups from urban spaces, we have presented a threefold typology. The first type explains ethnic displacement as a result of intersection of class and ethnicity, which means that state-led gentrification aimed at economic development often cause, intentionally or not, to ethnic displacement. For example, we can think of the case of Chicago's plans as a part of the federal Hope 6 plan. The second type explain ethnic displacement as a result of politically devaluated and stigmatized of areas. The image of ethnic minorities concentration as damaging the reputation of an area can encourage and legitimize a gentrification policy, sometimes described as social mixing. An example for this second type is the Singapore social mixing through its ethnic integration policy. Finally, the last type explained ethnic displacement as a result of wider state-led project of territorialization and ethno-national domination as we can see in the settler colonial societies. Focusing in this third type, only few studies have examined the ethno-national motivation and implication of gentrification, and most of them claim that urban redevelopment is strengthening ethno-nationalism through seemingly natural market operations. While we agree with this argument, we still think that the tension between class and ethno-national forces should not be overlooked, and as we will demonstrate in the case of Akko. Based on Monteresco term of ethno-gentrification, we suggest the term state-led ethno-gentrification to emphasize the central role of governments in gentrification process and the complexity between nationalism and neoliberalism. We use the qualitative methods, including analyzing policy documents and interview with policymakers, ILE members, and long-term Arab residents in the city of Akko. In the discourse of policymakers in the government, neoliberal economic logic combined with national motivation, as was explicit in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech when he said, this group, all of them Zionists, all of them passionate about taking action. This is expressed through the spirit of voluntarism, etc. They strengthen Jewish and Zionist identity of the city. On the other hand, local politicians in Akko downplayed the national significance of ILM presence in the old city and described the advantage in terms of economic development. As the mayor of Akko said to me, our policy is not to bring in weak population. We have enough of those as is. The municipal policy is to bring in a strong population that can contribute. At the same time, local politicians were concerned that the Judaization efforts will backfire, undermine Arab-Jewish relation, and transform the authentic character of the city. As the mayor of Akko continued and said, I can say that tourists come because the old city remain authentic with its original population. So we can understand that the neoliberal logic behind urban redevelopment contrasts the national demographic logic because the presence of Arab native residents has its own market value. Members of ILM describe themselves as taking part in a national mission, combining a logic of pioneering and security alongside a more universal economic language. As ILM director said to me, ILM's goal is a Zionist Jewish presence, that the old city will not be exclusive Arab. There was a strong presence of radical element of the Islamic movement here. When you have a segregated area in a mixed city, radicalism and hate growth. When ILM came in, it was the first time that Jews live here. Other members prefer to depoliticize the project and describe the present as something that promotes coexistence. So the nationalism is softened by the promise that newcomers, that their presence will benefit also the Arab residents. For the local residents of Old City of Akko, the state-led gentrification evokes a mixed reaction. While material benefits of gentrification are real, some of them find themselves unable to compete with the newcomers, lacking the economic resources. As local resident told me, Old City is pretty now, no arguments. The municipality is putting lots of effort to make the city touristic destination. Business is good, we are making a living, but they want us out for more tourism. In addition, residents suspect the intention of policymakers and feel threatened by what they perceive as a Judaization policy aimed at displacing them from the area. The presence of Hayalim supported by the government and the Jewish philanthropy designed to enhance Jewish presence in the old city, increasing this feeling. As local resident explains, we live in the old city for 72 years. My father was born here and my grandfather. I think that the state does not want Arabs here. Maybe some Arabs, but not a majority. The Arab community of Akko organized to fight these processes in various ways, as you can see here briefly. In conclusion, while studies on state-led gentrification tend to emphasize economic motivation behind the process, ethno-national motivation receive less attention. We argue that in contemporary contested cities, one cannot investigate economic development policy and specifically gentrification without considering the ethno-national context. Using the term state-led ethno-gentrification, we suggest that economic and national motivation may reinforce one another, but also produce tension. Thank you very much.